Hello and welcome back to the world of psychology. Can intelligence be influenced via priming and placebo effects? In 1986, a very influential study was published. It's been cited more than 680 times. And in this famous study, 6 priming experiments were conducted. Priming, you will say, what's priming? To explain this, let's first have a little experiment. All you have to do is think of an even number between 50 and 100. But it shouldn't be a number that consists of twice the same digit. So 55 wouldn't work because it's first of all not even, and it consists of twice the same digit. So make it random, just take the number that comes to your mind. Take whatever feels good for you. You got a number? Okay, then I'll try to figure out what's your number. I'll say 68 or 86, but I'm quite sure there is an 8 and or a 6. If I got it right, you might be sitting there and thinking, what the But in fact, I'm not a mind reader, even though many mentalists use the same techniques, which are, first of all, if you play this game, the odds are on your side. For any reason, people decide more often to choose 68 or 86. But there's also something else going on. I tried to prime you. And if you go back to the start, you will realize that there is a strange accumulation of the numbers 86, 68, 6. And sometimes I even try to create sounds that were near to 6 or 8. Just make it random, or it's 6 cited. And by doing this, I tried to prime you. So the idea is to activate the neuron networks in your brain that are responsible for the numbers 8 and 6. And as these regions are still, well, you could say glowing, like glowing electric wires, as these regions are still a little activated, the probability that you choose these numbers in this little game increased. It's not a guarantee, but you can increase the probability by doing this. If you think this sounds crazy, you will be very surprised what's going to come now. In the study I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, and which of course was not published in 1986, but in 1998 by Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg, titled The Relation Between Perception and Behavior, or How to Win a Game of Trivial Pursuit. In this study, 4 priming experiments, not 6, were conducted, and the research question was, can we influence the performance of subjects by making them think about a very clever person? For example, thinking about a professor. So in the first experiment, 60 undergraduate students of the University of Nijmegen were divided into 3 groups. One group was asked to list the behaviors, the lifestyle, and appearance attributes of a typical professor. Another group, this was the active control group, was asked to write down the typical behavior, lifestyle of a secretary. and the third group had to do none of these. Afterwards, the participants were told, here we have a general knowledge test from another department. It's from the personality department, and they are just trying to develop a new general knowledge scale. So please try to answer as many questions as possible. Altogether, there were 42 questions from the well-known game Trivial Pursuit. Questions like, what's the capital of Bangladesh? A. Dhaka. B. Hanoi. C. Yangon. D. Bangkok. Of course, participants were asked at the end of the experiment, well, did you realize that there might have been a link between the two experiments? And it turned out they had no idea. So the results are really amazing because indeed participants who were thinking about the typical lifestyle of a professor clearly outperformed the two other groups. In a second experiment, Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg wanted to figure out, well, does it make any difference if the priming procedure is extended? So this time they compared thinking about a professor for 9 minutes with thinking about professor for 2 minutes and not thinking about a professor at all. Again, there seemed to be a clear priming effect, and the longer the participants thought about the professor, the better they performed in the general knowledge test. In a third experiment, for time reasons we will leave out the fourth experiment. In a third experiment, they try to figure out, well, if you make participants think about a not so clever person, like for example a hooligan who is at least regarded as not that intelligent, might this deteriorate your performance on a general knowledge test? And indeed, they observed thinking about a hooligan for 9 minutes or for 2 minutes, but then the effect seemed smaller, made participants perform worse. So the conclusion of these experiments really seemed to be, if you want to win a game of Trivial Pursuit, make your opponent think of hooligans and you yourself think about a professor. This will improve your chances to win. Is priming such a powerful tool? Are we influenced that easy? Well, some scientists are highly skeptical. There is no doubt that priming exists, and there is no doubt that we can be manipulated by priming. But the question is the effect really that strong? And especially the idea that intelligent behavior can be primed is under attack. It's attacked by a study by David Shanks and colleagues, published in 2013, titled Priming Intelligent Behavior, an Elusive Phenomenon. In this study, 8 experiments were conducted aiming to replicate the results of Dijksterhuis and other scientists that published studies on this topic. And in not one of David Shanks' experiments, a significant result was found. Even though it's also right to say that some of these experiments were underpowered, so there weren't enough participants to make a possible effect visible. But there are at least 2 experiments that should be taken seriously because they were pretty close replications of the former studies by Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg. And these were the experiments 3 and 4. We will take a look especially at experiment 4 because there was a large number of subjects, altogether 100 participants. In this experiment, they compared the two groups of the former study from Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg, which showed the biggest effects when primed, and they compared these groups. So they had one group of 50 participants who were thinking about a professor for 5 minutes, and they had another group of 50 participants thinking about hooligans for 5 minutes. And keeping in mind that there's been a really big effect for these two groups in the original study, it's very surprising that Shanks and colleagues couldn't find any significant difference between these two groups. There's been a numerical effect in the right direction, but it was far from being significant. So, why did the replication fail? Right now, there is a very heated discussion in the most popular science journals, and of course, Dijksterhuis is defending his original results, and he puts forward that there might have been too much noise in the experiments of David Shanks and colleagues, which might have covered up the priming effects. For example, if the instructions are provided by a person instead of by a computer, like in the original study, this might have an influence, and in priming studies, seemingly small influences can have a huge effect. So this really might be one reason. Another reason may be the difficulty of the used general knowledge test. In fact, in the studies from Dijksterhuis, participants were able to solve some more questions than in the study of Shanks. And as self-efficacy might be a mediator in priming intelligent behavior, the participants in the study of Shanks couldn't experience, or at least to a lesser degree, that they were able to answer the questions. And so this might be a reason why the effect disappeared. But also Shanks and colleagues have some ideas why the replication failed. For example, the observed effects from Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg might be demand effects. The participants might have figured out what the hypothesis is, and therefore they behaved according to the hypothesis. Even though this is plausible, the experiment number 6 of Shanks' own study speaks against it. Because in this experiment, the participants were told what the hypothesis is, and as a result, they were far from behaving according to the hypothesis. In fact, it seemed they were behaving reactant. But if that's not the case, how can the results of Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg be explained? Shanks and colleagues say, well, these results are probably false positives, which might be caused by a post hoc selection of data. So maybe Dijksterhuis and Knippenberg conducted more than 4 experiments. Maybe they conducted 6 or 7, and in 3 there were no significant effects, and they only published the 4 experiments with significant effects. Furthermore, in this whole research field, there might be a general publication bias, which means experiments with positive results are published, whereas experiments that failed to produce significant results were not published. And indeed, this is a problem in psychology, but also in other sciences. Journals are interested in positive results, and it's much harder to get negative results published, even though, because of such issues we are talking about right now, there is a rethinking taking place at the moment. Especially the importance of replication studies is more and more accepted. The last point of criticism by Shanks and colleagues is a sideswipe at Diederik Stapel, who is a former social psychologist that worked in the same research field like Dijksterhuis, and who as well is coming from the Netherlands, and who is known to have committed research fraud. He changed data, he even made up data on his own. He did everything that is against the code of honor in science, and many of his studies have been retracted up to now, and maybe there are still some to follow. Stapel swore that he had committed his research fraud all alone. He said he had no accomplices, but of course, people who worked with him are now discredited. And I want to make it clear, up to now, there is absolutely no reason to say that Dijksterhuis is in any way involved in such fraudulent behavior. So I guess at the moment it's a quite unpleasant time for him to be a social psychologist in the Netherlands at the time of Diederik Stapel, who is probably the biggest betrayer of social psychology or of psychology ever. Last but not least, we will take a short look at the question whether it's possible to improve cognitive performance via placebo effects. Therefore, I want to introduce to you a nice little study. Little because there were just 40 participants taking part. The study was published by Ulrich Weger and Steve Loughnan in, I think, December 2012, and its title is Mobilizing Unused Resources Using the Placebo Concept to Enhance Cognitive Performance. All participants were asked to answer general knowledge questions presented on a computer, and in fact the questions were the same like in the study of Dijksterhuis. For example, how much is the number P? All participants went through 3 phases. The first phase was the warm-up phase, in which they were presented the questions, and right before the questions, the correct answer was presented. In the calibration phase, the presentation time of the answers became shorter and shorter, up to the point where they were no longer able to read the answers. So up to this point, there were no differences between the placebo group and the control group. But now the participants of the placebo group who were told, well, they're gonna be a subliminal priming. The answers will still be presented, but so short that you won't be able to recognize them. But your subconscious will be able to read the right answers, and on some level you will feel that you already know the answer. In the control group, participants were told, well, you see, there's gonna be a flash right before you have to answer the question. Well, this flash just indicates the beginning of a new trial. And indeed, it turned out that the subjects who thought they were subliminally primed were really able to answer more questions. Now you will say, well, maybe they were subliminally primed. No, because what was presented was not the right answer. What was presented was just a sequence of random numbers. So what these preliminary results can tell us, I say preliminary because there were really not many participants and there was just one cognitive test. In future studies, there should be more participants and more tests to observe this effect. But maybe the participants were able to show a better performance because they experienced less anxiety and less mind wandering. I mean, last episode we were talking about the deteriorating effects of mind wandering, and maybe if you have the feeling, well, I can trust my subconscious, it will have the right answer for me, these deteriorating effects are no longer present. So the bottom line of this episode is priming exists. There's no doubt that it exists. How strong the effect of priming on intelligent behavior really is, will have to show in future studies. And trusting your subconscious might improve your chances on a game of Trivial Pursuit.